The stars twinkled in the cold expanse of space, silent witnesses to the brewing storm. The massive Vormak fleet moved through the void, ready to strike their next target. The alien armada was a terrifying sight. Hundreds of ships, sleek and deadly, arranged in perfect formation. Their weapons were locked and loaded, poised to bring destruction to anyone in their path. They had been conquering one planet after another, and Earth was next on their list. The Vormak fleet's leader, General Korger, stood in the command center of his flagship, his alien eyes narrowing as he scanned the display. "Prepare to engage," he commanded, his voice deep and full of authority. "Nothing will stop us from claiming this world." His confidence radiated through the ship. To him, Earth was just another planet to be conquered, just another species to dominate. On the surface of Earth, however, humanity had been preparing for the worst. The global governments had come together in a last-ditch effort to defend their home. But despite their best efforts, they knew that the Vormak were far superior in technology and firepower. The people of Earth had little hope left. That was, until the signal came. Deep within a forgotten military base, hidden in the mountainous regions of the Earth's most remote areas, a team of engineers and soldiers monitored the strange anomaly on their radar. At first, it was a faint signal, a tiny blip in the vast emptiness of space. But as the hours passed, it grew stronger, clearer, and more persistent. The team watched in disbelief as the signal changed frequency, a familiar pattern emerging. "Is it?" Lieutenant Harris, one of the engineers, whispered, barely able to believe his own words. Could it be human? The small group of technicians exchanged confused looks. The last known human warship, the Defiant, had been lost in battle many years ago. Its fate had been a mystery. Some believed it had been destroyed. Others thought it had vanished into deep space. But now, this signal was unmistakable. It was a human ship, and it was approaching fast. "Alert the commander," Harris said quickly. "This could be our last chance." Meanwhile, aboard the Defiant, the crew was about to experience the shock of their lives. The warship had been hidden for years, its existence unknown to the world. The ship had been a project of humanity's most brilliant minds, designed for a war that had never come to pass. It was humanity's secret weapon, a final line of defense that no one expected to be used. But now, as the crew prepared for routine maintenance, they picked up the same signal, a beacon that was slowly growing louder. "Captain Cole," a voice echoed over the intercom. Lieutenant Bryant, a seasoned officer, spoke with a mixture of disbelief and excitement. "We've detected a Vormak fleet. They're heading straight for Earth." Emma Cole, the ship's captain, stood still for a moment, her hand resting on the command chair. Her mind raced as she processed the information. The Defiant had been silent for so long, but now, it was clear, the moment they had been waiting for had arrived. "Activate all systems," she ordered. Her voice was calm but firm. "We're going to make our stand. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about protecting humanity." The crew quickly sprang into action, preparing the warship for battle. The Defiant was not the largest ship in space, but it was one of the most advanced. Its hull was made of reinforced alloys, capable of withstanding enemy fire that would destroy most ships. Its weapons were designed for maximum destruction, capable of taking down even the most powerful foes. As the crew worked quickly, Emma watched the enemy fleet on the display screen. The Vormak ships, massive and terrifying, loomed closer. She knew that they were vastly outnumbered, but she refused to give in to fear. Humanity's last hope lay in this ship, and she was ready to fight with everything she had. "Captain, they're locking onto us," Lieutenant Bryant warned. "They've noticed us." Emma nodded. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Get us within range of their fleet. We're going to make them regret underestimating us." Outside the warship, the Vormak fleet was ready to engage. General Korger was confident in his victory. He had seen the human ships before, weak, slow, and ineffective. But when his sensors detected the Defiant, his mood changed instantly. The ship was unlike anything he had ever seen. "Report." Korger barked at his officers. "What is that human ship?" "It's a prototype, General," one of the officers stammered. "It's not supposed to exist. We have no record of it." Korger clenched his fists. "A human warship we've never encountered. Prepare to attack. We will crush them before they become a threat." "We can't stop now," Emma said, her voice sharp. "Get us closer. We need to hit their command center." As the Defiant drew closer, the massive silhouette of the warlord grew ever larger. The heart of the Vormec fleet, the ship was a fortress in space, its weapons capable of obliterating anything that crossed its path. But Emma was determined. She had one chance to bring it down, and she wasn't going to waste it. "Fire," Emma commanded. The Defiant's weapons lit up, firing blast after blast at the warlord. The shots slammed into the enemy ship, shaking it with violent tremors. But the warlord's thick armor held firm. The crew of the Defiant had only one option left. "Captain," Ensign Miller said, her voice trembling with urgency, "we've located their central command. It's located in the heart of the warlord. We need to target the core to disable their systems." "Understood," Emma said, her eyes narrowing. "Get us inside the firing range. We need to make this count." The Defiant shifted, aiming its weapons directly at the warlord's command core. But just as they locked on, the Vormec fleet responded. Dozens of enemy ships converged on the Defiant, opening fire from all directions. The Defiant shook as multiple hits landed, sending shockwaves through the ship. "Shields down to 5%. Bryant yelled. "We're taking heavy damage, Captain." Emma clenched her fists, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. But there was no turning back now. This was the moment they'd trained for, the moment when everything hung in the balance. "Hold steady," Emma shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We're almost there. Fire everything we've got." The Defiant unleashed a barrage of firepower. The energy blasts struck the warlord in rapid succession, hitting the core with pinpoint precision. But the Vormec were not giving up. Their ships swarmed in a desperate attempt to shield their leader. "Captain," Lieutenant Bryant said, his voice strained, "we've taken too much damage. We need to pull back, or we'll be destroyed." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She knew the risks, but she also knew this was their only chance. If they pulled back now, the Vormec would regroup, and humanity would be doomed. "We stay the course," Emma said, her voice filled with resolve. "We finish this." Then, with a final defiant roar, the Defiant fired one last round. The blast slammed into the warlord's core, and for a moment, everything seemed to pause. The Vormec ships slowed as if time had frozen, then exploded in a burst of light. The warlord trembled, and its systems began to fail. The central command network went dark. Emma watched as the Vormec fleet began to fall apart. Without the warlord guiding them, the Vormec ships turned into chaos, firing wildly at each other. The battle was won, and humanity had emerged victorious. But the victory came at a cost. The Defiant was barely hanging on. The hull was a twisted mess of metal, and the ship was barely functional. Yet the crew stood strong, knowing they had secured humanity's future. "We did it," Lieutenant Bryant said quietly, his voice filled with disbelief. "We did," Emma replied, her voice steady. "We've won, but this isn't over yet. We've only just begun." As the Defiant drifted through the remnants of the Vormec fleet, the crew could feel the weight of their victory. They had not just fought for survival, they had fought for the future of their species. They had proven that, no matter the odds, humanity would always fight back. The war was far from over, but for the first time, humanity could see the light at the end of the tunnel. The Vormec had been broken. And in that moment, Emma knew that this was just the beginning of a new era. An era where humanity's courage and determination would lead them to a future beyond the stars. "Shields down to 20%. Lieutenant Bryant reported, his voice strained. "We can't take much more of this." Keep going, Emma shouted. We're almost there. With the Vormak flagship looming larger in the viewport, Emma ordered the ship to fire all weapons. The Defiant's guns roared to life, unleashing a barrage of energy bolts aimed directly at the flagship. The first few shots missed, but the next round hit its mark, directly striking the flagship's port side. The Vormak flagship shuddered as the blast caused significant damage to its hull. Direct hit, Bryant cheered. We've breached their outer hull. But the victory was short-lived. The Vormak flagship retaliated almost instantly, its massive weapons charging once again. Get us out of here, Emma shouted, but it was too late. The Vormak flagship fired a devastating energy blast, and this time, it hit the Defiant squarely. The ship's shields buckled under the force, and the entire hull rattled violently. Lights flickered, and the command center was thrown into chaos. We've been hit, Bryant yelled, scrambling to regain control of the ship. Hull integrity at 30%. We're losing power. Emma's heart raced as she surveyed the damage. The Defiant was in danger of falling apart, but she refused to give up. She had one more move. All hands, prepare for emergency maneuvers, Emma ordered. We're not done yet. She turned to her tactical officer, Ensign Miller, whose face was filled with fear, but also determination. Miller, target their weapons systems. I want their guns offline now. Understood, Captain, Miller replied, her hands working furiously at the console. The Defiant's guns fired again, this time targeting the Vormak flagship's main weapons. A series of shots hit their mark, disabling several of the enemy flagship's primary weapons. For the first time in the battle, the Vormak flagship seemed to falter. Its weapons stopped firing, and the remaining fleet hesitated. Emma saw the opportunity and seized it. All forward thrusters, full power. We're going in for the kill. The Defiant shot forward, its remaining shields barely holding together. The Vormak flagship, crippled but still dangerous, struggled to turn in time to stop the human warship's advance. In a desperate move, Emma ordered a full-force collision course. Brace for impact, she shouted. The Defiant plowed into the Vormak flagship, its hull scraping against the alien vessel's damaged side. The force of the impact was enough to send shockwaves through the entire battlefield. The Vormak flagship, already weakened by the human assault, couldn't withstand the brutal attack. The Defiant's collision knocked out the flagship's power, rendering it immobile. The Vormak fleet, seeing their command ship disabled, fell into disarray. We did it, Bryant breathed, barely able to believe what they had just accomplished. We've crippled their flagship. But the battle wasn't over. The Vormak fleet was still out there, and they weren't going to give up easily. The Defiant had won a crucial victory, but the war was far from finished. The Defiant hung in space, its hull battered and scarred from the brutal exchange with the Vormak flagship. The once mighty warship, now limping, was held together by sheer willpower and the determination of its crew. Despite the heavy damage, the crew had done the unthinkable. They had crippled the flagship, the heart of the Vormak fleet. Inside the command center, Captain Emma Cole surveyed the damage. Sparks crackled from several control panels, and alarms rang throughout the ship. Yet, in the midst of all this chaos, there was a sense of victory, however small. The Vormak flagship, which had once seemed invincible, was now inoperable, its weapons silenced. The tide had shifted in humanity's favor, but the war was far from over. Status report, Emma barked, her voice sharp and authoritative despite the exhaustion she felt. Lieutenant Bryant, sweat trickling down his face, quickly turned to face her. We're still holding on, Captain. Shields are at 15%. Hull integrity is at 25%. We're losing power in several sectors. The crew is working hard, but we've taken a serious beating. Emma nodded grimly. We've survived worse. What about the Vormak fleet? Most of their fleet is in disarray. Without the flagship coordinating them, they're vulnerable, Bryant replied. But they're still numerous, and they're coming for us. They won't back down easily." "Noted," Emma said, her mind racing. "We need to capitalize on this. We can't let them regroup. We're going to hit them hard before they recover." Across the room, Ensign Miller spoke up, her voice urgent. "Captain, we've intercepted a Vormac transmission. They're sending reinforcements. More ships are en route. We don't have long. All weapons, full power. Let's give them another surprise." The Defiant fired again, this time targeting the lid ship of the Vormac fleet. The ship's shields buckled under the barrage of energy blasts, and the alien craft erupted in flames as its outer hull cracked. The Vormac fleet was reeling, unsure of how to deal with this human warship that refused to be intimidated. In the chaos, the Vormac flagship's communications channel crackled to life. General Korger's voice thundered through the static. "This battle is not over. Humans," Korger's voice boomed. "You may have damaged my ship, but you are still outnumbered. Surrender now, or be destroyed." Emma's face hardened. She knew the Vormac were trying to intimidate them, but they had no intention of surrendering. Not now. Not when they had a chance to win. "We will never surrender." Emma's voice rang out clear and defiant. "We will fight to the end." With that, the Defiant moved in for another round of fire. The enemy fleet had no idea what was coming next. Humanity's warship had arrived, and it was far from what the Vormac had prepared for. The battle had only just begun. The Vormac fleet, though staggered by the unexpected blow to their flagship, quickly regrouped. The Defiant had caught them off guard, but the enemy commanders were no strangers to defeat. General Korger, infuriated but resolute, barked orders to his fleet. "Regroup," Korger shouted, his voice cold and commanding. "These humans are a threat. We will not let them stand in our way." The Vormac ships, their sleek forms gliding silently through the darkness of space, began to shift into new attack formations. More weapons powered up, and more ships came into view, ready to press their advantage. The Defiant, though strong, was still a single ship, vastly outnumbered by the aliens. Emma Cole stood firm at the command console, her gaze fixed on the enemy fleet. The comms buzzed with reports from her crew, each update more urgent than the last. The Defiant had made a powerful statement, but the enemy wasn't backing down. If anything, they were angrier now. "Captain," Lieutenant Bryant reported, his voice tense, "they're coming in fast. Multiple ships are targeting us. We're going to be surrounded soon." Emma didn't flinch. She had expected this. The Vormac would adapt. They always did. She had to think fast if they were going to survive. Earth depended on it. "Divert power to rear shields," Emma ordered. "Take evasive action. I want to keep them guessing. We can't stay still." "Aye, Captain." Bryant quickly adjusted the ship's power distribution. The Defiant surged forward, moving in unpredictable patterns, weaving in and out of the approaching Vormac ships. Each twist and turn brought them closer to the enemy's heart, but also deeper into enemy territory. They were surrounded on all sides now. The Vormac ships closed in like wolves circling their prey, their weapons primed and ready. "Shields are holding at 70%, Captain," reported Ensign Miller, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "But they're charging their weapons. We can't keep dodging forever." Emma's brow furrowed. She knew the enemy was waiting for the right moment to strike, and they wouldn't hesitate when that moment arrived. The crew of the Defiant was doing their best to outmaneuver the Vormac, but every minute that passed, the enemy grew more confident. Emma needed to turn the tide, or they wouldn't make it out alive. "All weapons, full power," Emma said, her voice sharp. "We need to hit them hard before they can close the gap." The Defiant's weapons hummed to life, energy beams shooting out from the ship's turrets, striking the closest Vormac ships with deadly precision. Explosions rippled across the enemy fleet, but it wasn't enough to stop them. The Vormac ships fought back with relentless firepower, their blasts smashing into the Defiant's shields. "Captain, we've taken a direct hit to the port side," Lieutenant Bryant called out. Shields are down to 50% on that side. If they hit us again, it could breach the hull. Emma gritted her teeth. She knew they were getting closer to the breaking point, but retreat wasn't an option. They had to hold their ground, no matter the cost. Target their engines, Emma commanded. Take out their propulsion systems. We can't afford to keep dancing around them. Hit them where it hurts. The Defiant's weapons fired again, more accurately this time, aiming for the engines of the nearest Vormak ship. The blast struck true, and the enemy vessel exploded in a massive burst of light, its debris scattering into space. The Vormak ships surrounding the Defiant hesitated for just a moment, long enough for Emma to see an opportunity. Back aboard the Defiant, the crew readied themselves. The sound of the battle alarms echoed through the ship. It was time. All hands, brace for impact, Emma ordered. The crew took their positions, adrenaline pumping through their veins. The shields were powered up, the weapons primed. Outside, the Vormak fleet was closing in fast, their weapons charging. The time for waiting was over. The Defiant was ready to fight. As the first shots were fired, the crew of the Defiant braced for what would be the toughest battle of their lives. The Vormak fleet had no idea what they were about to face. The human warship had arrived. The fight for Earth was about to begin. The tension in the command center was palpable. Captain Emma Cole stood at the helm of the Defiant, her eyes fixed on the Vormak fleet, which now loomed large in the viewport. Her crew moved with precision, their hands working fast as the warship powered up its weapons and shields. Outside, the vast Vormak armada was closing in, its ships growing larger with every passing moment. "Ready the weapons," Emma ordered, her voice steady but intense. "We're not running. We're standing our ground." "Yes, Captain," Lieutenant Bryant replied, his hands flying over the console in front of him. The hum of the warship's power systems vibrated through the floor beneath them. Each crew member knew this was a one-shot deal. They had no reinforcements. The Defiant was all humanity had left. "Captain," said Ensign Miller, an officer in charge of long-range sensors, her voice trembling slightly. "They've locked onto us. They're about to fire." Emma's expression remained calm, but her mind raced. She knew the odds were slim. The Vormak fleet was vast, technologically superior, and merciless. She glanced at Bryant. "Take evasive action," she ordered. "Divert power to the shields. Full throttle. We'll make them work for this." The Defiant jolted as the ship's engines roared to life, sending it into a sharp turn. The first wave of Vormak fire missed, but Emma could see the enemy ships beginning to adjust their targeting. They were quick, too quick. She braced herself. "Shields holding at 85%, reported Lieutenant Bryant, his voice tight with concentration. "Increase forward shields. Get us closer to their command ship," Emma said. "We need to send them a message." With a series of controlled bursts from the Defiant's engines, the warship veered toward the Vormak flagship, the massive craft that commanded the alien fleet. It was a towering structure, shaped like an inverted pyramid, with jagged edges and glowing, ominous markings along its hull. The Vormak flagship was easily the largest ship in the fleet, its weapon systems capable of decimating entire fleets in a single blow. "All hands, brace for impact," Emma called out. The ship lurched again, but this time, the Defiant wasn't dodging. It was charging straight for the heart of the enemy fleet. The crew, despite their fear, steeled themselves. They were about to make the first strike. "Captain," Lieutenant Bryant's voice was filled with urgency. "They've opened fire. Incoming." In an instant, the ship shook violently as the enemy's energy blasts hit their shields. Sparks flew from nearby consoles, but the Defiant's reinforced hull held. The power shields flickered, but they held strong under the onslaught. "Return fire," Emma ordered, her tone unwavering. "Target their engines." The crew of the Defiant reacted instantly. The ship's weapons powered up, sending a barrage of plasma bolts hurtling toward the Vormak flagship. The first shots missed, But the second volley found its mark. The Defiant's energy beams struck the Vormak flagship's engines, causing massive explosions on the ship's surface. "Direct hit," Bryant shouted. "We've disabled their engines. They can't move." Emma's eyes burned with determination. The Vormak fleet had underestimated them, thinking humanity was no match for their might. But now, the Defiant had delivered a painful blow to their flagship, and the enemy fleet was beginning to panic. The Vormak ships began to scatter, unsure of how to respond to this unexpected resistance. "Prepare for their counterattack," Emma ordered. "They won't sit back for long." As she spoke, the sensors blared. The Vormak were regrouping, their weapons charging for another assault. But Emma wasn't going to wait for them to strike first. "Captain, we've just received a transmission from the fleet," Ensign Miller reported, her voice calm but laced with urgency. "It's Admiral Price. He wants to speak with you." Emma nodded. "Patch it through." The screen flickered, and soon the familiar face of Admiral Price appeared, his expression grave but determined. "Captain Cole," he began, his voice steady, "you've done something extraordinary today. You've crippled the Vormak flagship, and their fleet is in disarray. But we have to be honest. We're not in the clear. They'll regroup, and when they do, they'll come at us with everything. We need to end this once and for all." Emma's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting, Admiral?" Price's face was hard as stone. "We have a plan. We've been working on a new weapon, one that could tip the balance in our favor. It's risky, but it might be our only chance. The Vormak's Central Command Network relies on a series of supercomputers spread across their fleet. If we can take out those systems, their fleet will collapse. The Vormak will have no way to coordinate their forces." Emma's heart raced. This was it, the final gamble. "And how do we target these supercomputers?" "We've pinpointed their location," Price replied. "There's a Vormak supership, the Warlord, at the heart of their fleet. It houses the most critical systems. We need you to launch a strike against it, disable their central control, and bring the fleet to its knees. If we fail, we may not get another chance." Emma's grip tightened on the console. It was a bold move, perhaps the boldest humanity had ever attempted. A direct assault on the Vormak's most powerful ship, surrounded by their remaining fleet. The Defiant was already damaged, and the crew was exhausted. But Emma had no choice. If humanity was to survive, this was the only way forward. "Understood, Admiral," Emma said, her voice firm. "We'll do it." "Good luck, Captain," Price said. "We're counting on you." The transmission ended, and the room fell into a tense silence. Emma knew that this was their last shot. The Vormak were preparing for their final assault, but this time, humanity had the upper hand. They had a plan, one that could cripple the Vormak once and for all. "We've got one shot at this," Emma said, turning to her crew. "The Vormak are coming, and they won't hold back. We hit them hard and fast, and we take down the Warlord. Our mission is simple. We either succeed, or humanity's chances of survival are over. But I know we can do this. We've already proven ourselves once. We'll do it again." The crew nodded, their determination burning brighter than ever. They had survived against the odds before, and they would do it again. The Vormak might be strong, but humanity was stronger. The crew of the Defiant had proven it. Now they had to finish what they started. "All hands, prepare for battle," Emma shouted. "This is it, the final push. We end this today." The final showdown was upon them. The Defiant, battered and scarred from the previous battles, drifted through the void of space, hurtling toward the heart of the Vormak fleet. The Warlord, their most powerful supership, loomed large in the distance, surrounded by a swarm of Vormak warships. Each ship gleamed with the cold precision of an army determined to destroy. Inside the Defiant, the crew was prepared. The intense pressure of the moment hung over them, but there was a quiet resolve in the air. This was it, the last chance to end the war and secure humanity's future. No second chances. The mission was simple: strike the Warlord, disable its central command systems, and bring the entire Vormak fleet to its knees. If they succeeded, the Vormak would be leaderless and vulnerable. If they failed, the Defiant would be destroyed, and humanity's last hope would fade into the void. "All systems are ready, Captain," Lieutenant Bryant said, his fingers flying over the controls. "We've got a clear path to the Warlord, but we'll need to move fast." "Their fleet is mobilizing." Emma nodded, her eyes cold and focused. "We don't have time for hesitation. We need to take them down before they can organize." The Vormak fleet had already begun to move, a vast armada of ships with weapons primed for battle. Emma's mind raced. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and their ship was on the verge of collapse. But there was something that the Vormak didn't understand: the resolve of a human crew willing to risk everything for survival. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Emma ordered. "We're going in." The Defiant surged forward, its weapons charging as they closed in on the Warlord. The Vormak ships fired in retaliation, energy blasts lighting up the space around them. The crew braced for impact as the Defiant dodged and weaved, narrowly avoiding the deadly fire from the enemy fleet. "Shields holding at 10%, Bryant called out, his voice tight. "Hull integrity is dropping fast." "Now," Emma shouted. "All ahead, full speed. Break through their formation." With a sudden surge of speed, the Defiant shot forward, its engines roaring as it tore through the thinning Vormak line. Explosions lit up the space behind them as more alien ships were hit, but the Defiant was now in the clear, speeding toward the rear of the enemy fleet. "We've broken through," Lieutenant Bryant said, his voice filled with relief. "But they're not going to let us get away that easily." Emma nodded. "They won't, but we got a few more tricks up our sleeves." Suddenly, an alert sounded, and Emma turned to the sensor panel. The screen flashed with a new message, one she wasn't expecting. "Captain," Ensign Miller said, her voice tight with excitement, "we've detected a larger ship entering the battlefield. It's the Vormak flagship. They've repaired it." General Korger's flagship had been badly damaged in the first assault, but now it was back in action, its enormous guns powering up. The Vormak were about to launch their final assault. "We can't let them hit us with those weapons," Emma said, her voice steely with resolve. "Get us out of here, full speed ahead." "But we're not running. We're luring them in." The Defiant shot forward again, dodging through the remaining Vormak ships. The flagship followed, its enormous weapons charging for another deadly strike. Emma's plan was simple: bait the flagship into a position where they could land a decisive blow. "Target locked on the flagship," Lieutenant Bryant said, his voice focused. "We have one shot at this." Emma took a deep breath. The crew had survived this far, but this would be the true test. She turned to her crew with determination. "On my mark," she said, "prepare for everything we've got." The Vormak flagship loomed larger, its weapons ready to unleash destruction. The crew of the Defiant was ready. "Now," Emma shouted. The Defiant fired everything they had. The enemy flagship shuddered as blasts of energy hammered its hull. For a moment, everything seemed to stop, the fate of the battle hanging in the balance. The battlefield was chaotic. Explosions lit up the vast expanse of space, sending debris in all directions. The Vormak fleet, though shaken by the damage to their flagship, had not given up. Their ships moved in coordinated formations, adjusting their tactics and pressing the attack with renewed vigor. The Defiant, though battered, held its ground. Captain Emma Cole stood at the command console, her eyes scanning the tactical readouts. The enemy fleet was regrouping, and the flagship was closing in. She knew their next move would be crucial. If they didn't strike now, they'd be overwhelmed. "Captain," Lieutenant Bryant's voice interrupted her thoughts. "The Vormak flagship is targeting us. They've locked on to our location. We can't avoid them forever." Emma's pulse quickened. The flagship's weapons were far more advanced than anything the Defiant had encountered so far. One well-placed shot could cripple their entire ship. But Emma had no intention of running. She had to gamble. This was their only chance. "Set course for their flagship," Emma ordered. "We'll make our stand here." Bryant hesitated for a split second, his face pale. "Are you sure about this, Captain? They'll destroy us before we can even get close." "We don't have a choice," Emma replied firmly. "We need to take out their flagship. It's the only way we can stop this war." The Defiant surged forward, engines roaring, as it closed the distance to the Vormak flagship. The crew moved with practiced precision, preparing for the final assault. Emma's grip tightened on the command console, her mind racing through the strategies she had drilled into her crew. As they approached, the Vormak flagship fired. The energy blasts tore through space, coming at them with incredible speed. Emma ordered the ship to bank sharply to the right, narrowly avoiding the barrage. The Defiant shook as another blast came dangerously close, the shockwave rattling the entire ship. "Shields at 40%. Bryant shouted, his voice full of urgency. "We can't keep dodging like this. Brace for impact," Emma commanded. "Full power to the front shields. We need to get in close." The Defiant pushed forward, hurtling toward the Vormak flagship. The enemy's weapons continued to fire, each shot getting closer and closer. The hum of the ship's engines was deafening, the tension mounting with each passing second. Emma felt as if the entire ship was holding its breath. Suddenly, a blast from the Vormak flagship struck the Defiant's shields head-on. The ship shuddered violently as the energy surged through the hull. Sparks flew from the control panels, and alarms blared across the command center. Emma's heart sank. Reinforcements would tip the scales back in the Vormak's favor. The crew of the Defiant had fought valiantly, but they couldn't sustain this level of combat forever. They needed a decisive strike, one final push to cripple the Vormak once and for all. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Emma ordered. "We're going after their remaining commanders." With the Vormak flagship disabled, the remaining Vormak ships had no central command. Emma knew this was the perfect time to strike, before they could reorganize. "We can do this," Emma muttered under her breath, her fists clenched. "We have one shot at this." "Captain, we've got a fleet of Vormak closing in on us," Lieutenant Bryant warned, his tone grim. "There are at least 20 ships, all heavily armed." "Not good enough," Emma said, determination hardening her voice. "All weapons, full power. Let's make sure they know who they're dealing with." The Defiant's weapons powered up, the ship's remaining energy reserves coursing through its systems. The crew was strained, but they were focused. The Vormak might be stronger, but humanity had something the Vormak couldn't understand: determination. "Ready, Captain," Bryant said, his hands gripping the controls. "Now," Emma ordered. The Defiant surged forward, its weapons firing in rapid succession. Energy blasts struck Vormak ships, causing explosions and disarray. The Vormak were taken off guard, their ships scattering as the Defiant tore through their ranks. The tide was turning, but Emma knew they couldn't keep this up for long. They had to make every shot count. "Direct hit," Bryant shouted. "One of their lead ships is down." The crew cheered as the Vormak ship exploded, but Emma wasn't celebrating. They had to keep the pressure on. She could see the reinforcements arriving, massive warships coming out of warp, their weapons charging for another assault. "We need to finish this now," Emma called. "Focus on their command ships." The Defiant turned its attention to the Vormak's remaining command vessels. These ships were the key to the enemy's strategy. Take them out, and the fleet would be scattered. The Defiant locked onto one of the largest Vormak ships and fired everything they had. The energy blasts hit their target with precision, damaging the enemy's engines and weapons. The Vormak ship staggered, struggling to stay in the fight. Emma didn't let up. She could see the fear in the Vormak's movements now. They were losing control, and they knew it. "That's it," Emma said under her breath. "They're breaking." As the Vormak command ships were struck one by one, their fleets began to lose cohesion. The remaining Vormak vessels retreated, scrambling to regroup, but it was too late. The Defiant had delivered a crippling blow. "We've done it," Lieutenant Bryant said, his voice almost in disbelief. Emma allowed herself a moment of relief, but only a moment. The Vormak fleet was still formidable, and the war was far from over. But for now, they had achieved what seemed impossible. Humanity had struck a blow that would be remembered for ages. "Get us out of here," Emma commanded. "But don't think for a second that the war is over. We've won a battle, but the war rages on." As the Defiant pulled away from the wreckage of the Vormak fleet, the crew could only wonder what would come next. Their victory was hard-earned, but the future was still uncertain. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. The Defiant floated among the wreckage of the Vormak fleet, its hull scared and battered. The crew was exhausted, but their faces carried a sense of pride. They had dealt a decisive blow to the Vormak, and their enemies were retreating in disarray. However, Emma knew better than to think the threat had disappeared entirely. This was only one battle, and there were still more to come. The Vormak were relentless. They had underestimated humanity's resilience once, and it had cost them dearly. But now they would be coming back stronger, angrier, and more desperate than ever. Emma stood in the command center, her eyes glued to the tactical display. The Vormak fleet, though damaged, was already regrouping. Reinforcements were arriving, and they were much larger than any force Emma had ever seen before. "We've made a significant dent in their fleet, Captain," Lieutenant Bryant said, his voice trained. "But they're pulling back. They'll be back, and they're bringing everything they've got." Emma turned to face him, her gaze unwavering. "I know. We have to prepare for the worst." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. There was no room for error. They couldn't afford to give the Vormak another chance to reorganize. The human fleet had to make one final push, one final stand to ensure the Vormak wouldn't be able to fight back.